Well, hello, and welcome to this episode of Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. Believe it or not, we've already made it to 10 episodes and 3 bonus episodes, which is pretty wild. We've also made a ton of progress in pushing back against fascism in the United States and building community by building 1,000 leaders in 1,000 different communities. And I have to reflect because today is October 18th, 2025, which was the obviously massive day of No Kings protest across the country. Literally millions of people gathering in the streets doing exactly what we talk about here, which is building resistance to authoritarianism in the United States of America. And without question, it was an incredibly successful day. And I think we talked earlier in the bonus episode and on several episodes of Rebel Radio about the growing tension and the concerns that people had about violence. Would there be violence today? But once again, what we have demonstrated is that everyday Americans who actually care about their country, who want to push and proceed and preserve democracy, were willing to take to the streets to have an effective demonstration, to peacefully connect with their neighbors, to do good and build community. It was an unquestioned and unparalleled success. Having said that, a lot of things also happened today, and at the end of this night, I realized that I'm a couple days behind on recording episode 10 because of all of these thoughts brewing around my head. Something else happened to me today that really struck home where we are in America and the advancing authoritarianism, the advancing of the power of the police, which we'll talk about shortly. And then we'll continue the conversation of our model lesson of the Society of the White Rose and Hans and Sophie Schul talking today about letter 3. But before we get into letter 3, I do want to thank you for following our podcast and for learning along with us. So thank you very much for that. Let us talk about No Kings specifically. Today, we're still waiting for official figures about No Kings and how successful the event was, but unquestionably, whether that's on social media or personal stories, we're seeing thousands, if not millions, of examples of individuals who successfully took to the streets to bring positive energy to their communities. We are having an impact. It is starting to move the needle. But upon reflection of the day, I couldn't ignore something. This felt very similar to the June No Kings event, where many people walked away from the day feeling exuberant, feeling excited, feeling connected to their community. And in a little bit of a moment of pattern recognition, I remembered something that I think is more important to discuss now than it has ever been to discuss. So I want us to all do a little bit of sort of flashback. Let us look back to June. We all, of course, remember the disastrous military parade, which just magically happened to coincide with the president's birthday. The embarrassing spectacle of the president insisting on a military parade while most of the country was not feeling particularly patriotic. It was an embarrassing display. Some might say ridiculous. And while there are open and active questions about the degree to which the military sort of sabotaged that particular display, it's without question that it did not have the authoritarians' intended effect. In other words, it was embarrassing. Contrast that with a massively successful June 14th No Kings event, which garnered national, indeed international attention, and but for today, might have been one of the largest demonstrations in American history, if not global history. Well, I wanted us to do a little bit of history so that we could remember what happened after that, and we could expect to learn what is going to happen next. One of the most important lessons for today that I want you to learn is learning from the advance of the authoritarian. As we move in resistance, the authoritarian is going to move back and push back against our resistance with increasing tension, perhaps increasing violence, and increasing power of the state. So let us remember what happened. On June 14th, 2025, the last significant No Kings protest, about 4 to 6 million people participated across 2,200 separate events spanning all 50 states and international solidarity protests. And we must, of course, remember the origin of the phrase "No Kings." The No Kings protest came, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because symbolism and words are very important. In perhaps one of the most disastrous Supreme Court cases in modern American history, the United States Supreme Court, in July of 2024, issued the president, writ large, executive immunity. We will long live with the haunting of this decision, but Justice Sotomayor, officially writing in her dissent, planting the seed, if you will, of no kings. She said, "In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law." She warned us, "This makes a mockery of the principle foundational to our Constitution and system of government, that no man is above the law." Justice Sotomayor was the original dissenter, the original No Kings protest, if you might say that. As with today's protest, which happened on October 18th, the June 14th protest was a massive success. And I specifically decided to record this episode tonight because I remember feeling the same energy. I remember people walking away from the No Kings event in June saying, "Yes, I'm excited. When is the next event?" And people are doing that today. They're saying, "Yes, I'm excited. When is the next event?" To give you some examples of how successful these events were before I get into the next part, there's a couple examples here, but one example in Wisconsin, an individual grew her chapter from 28 members in January 2025 to 1,900 people by June 14th, 2025. We have a similar story in our community. But think about that. 28 people in January, 1,900 people in June. Pretty impressive. But after the celebratory nature of what happened, the administration saw clearly the resistance, the energy, and the tone, and they decided to push back aggressively. And they did. On June 27, 2025, the Supreme Court issued a devastating ruling. They issued Trump v. Casa. That, of course, was the decision from the Supreme Court ending the practice of nationwide injunctions. Instead of nationwide preliminary injunctions prior to massive violations of our civil rights, each individual affected by this administration's action would have to file a separate lawsuit. This is a drastic shift, and it really changed our ability to resist with the courts. Justice Jackson was quite clear, and she wrote that this court's complicity in the creation of a culture of disdain for the lower courts, their rulings, and the law, as they interpret it, will surely hasten the downfall of our government institutions, enabling our collective demise. Just 11 days later, the Supreme Court again issued another administrative stay, allowing the president to proceed with massive workforce reductions, despite lower court injunctions blocking them. Only Justice Jackson again dissented by calling the decision a truly unfortunate, but also hubristic and senseless. By August 26th, nearly 200,000 federal workers had left their jobs, the largest federal workforce reduction in modern history. This was enabled by a Supreme Court that removed judicial barriers from executive action. In spite of Americans showing to the street, the Supreme Court and this administration continued to suppress and press down on our rights. On July 17, 2025, the president issued an executive order creating Schedule G, a new classification allowing unlimited political appointments of federal employees in policy determining, policy making, or policy advocating roles. This gave the president a blank check to politicize the federal workforce beyond extending the existing 4,000 political appointments. And of course, as you may now remember, on July 24, 2025, the president issued Executive Order 14321, ending crime and disorder on America's streets, directing the Attorney General to reverse judicial practices that impede civil commitments of individuals with mental illness. Under this horrible executive order, the president also began to essentially criminalize homelessness, urban camping, and loitering, and explicitly stated shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment will restore public order, literally demonizing the homeless with the executive power. And the most shocking single action. I'm going to pause because I'm getting intense talking about this. On August 4th, 2025, hours after the Bureau of Labor Statistics released a disappointing jobs report that only 73,000 jobs were added in July, the president fired the BLS commissioner. The president fired a labor commissioner for releasing truthful data that he didn't like. A truly shocking moment in American history. And then, on the subject of resistance and protest, on August 25th, 2025, the president issued an executive order directing the Department of Justice to prosecute flag burning seeking a 1-year jail sentence, no early exits. When you burn the American flag, it incites riots at levels that we've never seen before, he said. The same day, by the way, he issued 3 additional orders, one ending cashless bail. On August 22nd, FBI agents searched the Maryland home of John Bolton. On August 28th, the administration placed several FEMA employees on administrative leave after they signed an open letter criticizing the FEMA overhaul. On that very same day, August 28th, the president issued an executive order ending collective bargaining rights for federal employees. By August of 2025, the impact on federal workers is devastating. CNN tracked 128,000 federal workers that were laid off or targeted by layoffs. When the Supreme Court issued its July 8th stay on the workforce firings, one coalition of state attorneys generals noted this decision has dealt a serious blow to our democracy. The pattern is clear. When we resist, the administration pushes back. The reason I bring this up is not to encourage despair, but instead, I want you to understand that because we had a successful event today, that we should expect and indeed we should prepare for this administration to react, to respond, and to try to crush our hope. So let us not give them what they wanted. And what can we draw from this? Well, quite simply, we can draw the fact that clearly the president and this administration, perhaps Stephen Miller more than anyone else, wanted today's events to lead to the kind of violence and action in the street that would allow them to further their military abuse of the American public. Troops in the streets enforcing American laws. I believe they were confident. They were indeed hoping for violence or blood in the streets so that they could further the use of the military and normalize the use of a military prior to the 2026 elections. After all, with men and women in camouflage in the streets, it makes voicing opposition to any president or any administration just a little scarier. But guess what? They did not succeed. And let me make sure I'm very clear. They did not succeed specifically because we did succeed. So, to summarize what we've learned, the June 14th No Kings event was a massive success, and it was met with massive resistance from the administration. I would argue a significant response from the administration that took away the passion and the energy and the courage and the excitement that people had when taking to the streets on June 14th. We have to acknowledge in the ideological battle for the soul of America that we're going to have moments just like this. And the reason I wanted to record this show tonight, as it was sort of bubbling around in my head, was the very fact that I wanted us to be prepared for what is likely to be a further authoritarian reach. We should expect, and indeed we should plan to see more pushback, to see more intensity, to see crazy executive orders, to see crazy examples. And indeed, let us not forget that as as of October 18th, 2025, the government is still shut down. What we can take from this lesson is quite simple. As we analyze the battle against fascism, we can take real measure of ourselves in the moment. We can say, I'm not going to fall for this again. I'm still going to celebrate this victory, and I'm not going to allow that to be taken away from us. So that is the first challenge of the evening. And this brings us to the next lesson. If you've been listening to these episodes of the podcast, you have probably been aware that one of the things that we're doing is dissecting previous resistance movements. One of the previous resistance movements we have been dissecting is the Society of the White Rose in Germany, 1942 to 1943. We've read through letters 1 and 2, and today, very relevant, we're going to read through the third letter of the resistance movement. And so again, if this is your first time hearing about it, in Germany in 1942, 1943, a group of activists called the Society of the White Rose, in spite of great risk to themselves, created and printed messaging through leaflets that they printed, mimeographed, and handed out in public places or mailed to prominent figures. And in doing so, at great risk to themselves, they demonstrated resistance. The third letter, or the third leaflet of the White Rose, is very relevant when we talk about this. So now, let us listen to the third leaflet of the Society of the White Rose.
All ideal forms of government are utopias. A state cannot be constructed on a purely theoretical basis. Rather, it must grow and ripen in the way an individual human being matures. But we must not forget that, at the starting point of every civilization, the state was already there in rudimentary form. The family is as old as man himself, and out of this initial bond, man was endowed with reason, creating for himself a state founded on justice, whose highest law was the common good. The state should exist as a parallel to the divine order, and the highest of all utopias, the civitas Dei, is the model which in the end it should approximate. We do not want to pass judgment here on the many possible forms of a state, democracy, constitutional monarchy, and so on. But one matter needs to be brought out clearly and unambiguously. Every individual human being has a claim to a useful and just state, one which secures the freedom of the individual as well as the good of the whole. For, according to God's will, man is intended to pursue his natural goal, his earthly happiness, in self-reliance and self-chosen activity, freely and independently within the community of life and work of the nation. But our present state is the dictatorship of evil. Oh, we've known that for a long time, I hear you object, and we don't need to have it brought to our attention yet again. But, I ask you, if you know that, why do you not bestir yourselves? Why do you allow these men in power to rob you step by step, openly and in secret, of one domain of your rights after another, until one day nothing at all will be left but a mechanized state system presided over by criminals and drunkards? Is your spirit already so crushed by abuse that you forget it is your right, or rather, your moral duty, to abolish this system? But if a person no longer can summon the strength to demand his right, then it is an absolute necessity that he should fall. We would deserve to be dispersed throughout the earth like dust before the wind, if we did not muster our powers at this late hour, and finally find the courage which up to now we have lacked. Do not hide your cowardice under a cloak of prudence. We don't have a great deal of choice. There's only one means available to us: passive resistance. The sense and the aim of passive resistance is to topple National Socialism, and in this struggle we must not recoil from any course of action, wherever it may lie. We must attack National Socialism wherever it is open to attack. We must bring this monster of a state to an end as soon as possible. A victory of fascist Germany in this war would have immeasurable, frightful consequences. The military victory over Bolshevism must not become the primary concern of the Germans. The defeat of the Nazis must unconditionally be the absolute priority. The greater necessity of this latter demand we will demonstrate to you in one of our forthcoming leaflets. And now every convinced opponent of National Socialism must ask himself how he can fight against the present state in the most effective way, how he can strike it in its most vulnerable places, through passive resistance without a doubt. It is obvious that we cannot provide each individual with a blueprint for his acts. We can only suggest them in general terms, and each person has to find the right way for himself to attain this end. Sabotage in armament plants and war industries, sabotage at all gatherings, rallies and meetings of organizations launched by the National Socialist Party, obstruction of the smooth functioning of the war machine, a machine for a war that goes on solely to shore up and perpetuate the National Socialist Party and its dictatorship, sabotage in all the areas of science and scholarship which further the continuation of the war, whether in universities, technical colleges, laboratories, research institutes or technical bureaus. Sabotage at all cultural events which could potentially enhance the prestige of the fascists among the people. Sabotage in all branches of the arts, even the slightest bit connected with National Socialism or rendering it service. Sabotage in all publications, all newspapers in the pay of the government that defends its ideology and aid in disseminating the brown lie. Do not give a penny to street collections, even when they are conducted under the cloak of charity, for this is only a disguise. In reality, the proceeds benefit neither the Red Cross nor the destitute. The government does not need this money. It is not financially dependent on these collections. After all, the printing presses run continuously to manufacture any desired amount of paper currency. But the people must constantly be kept in suspense. The pressure of the curb must not slacken. Do not contribute to the collections of metal, textiles, and the like. Seek to convince all your acquaintances, including those in the lower social classes, of the senselessness of continuing, of the hopelessness of this war, of our spiritual and economic enslavement at the hands of the National Socialists, of the destruction of all moral and religious values, and urge them to offer passive resistance. Aristotle, Politics. And further, it is part of the nature of tyranny to strive to see to it that nothing is kept hidden of that which any subject says or does, but that everywhere he will be spied upon. Further, to set all men against each other, friends against friends, the people against the nobility, and even the rich among themselves. Then it is part of such tyrannical measures to make the subjects poor, in order to be able to pay the bodyguards and to keep them occupied with earning their livelihood, so that they will have neither leisure nor opportunity to instigate conspiratorial acts. Further, such taxes on income as were imposed in Syracuse, for under Dionysius the citizens had gladly paid out their whole fortunes in taxes within 5 years. The tyrant is also inclined to constantly foment wars. Please copy and distribute.
So let us cover and go over what we learned from that and how it applies to the lesson today on No Kings. Okay, as we listen to those words from the White Rose from 1942, Leaflet 3 is very direct. It is a significant challenge to the system. But what lessons can we draw on a day like today, April 18th? The parallels are actually quite striking, and they're actually chilling, in my opinion. When you look at No Kings, we're talking about an identical pattern of the collapse of democracy. It's separated by 83 years, but it's the same playbook. In the White Rose letters, they talk about the gradual theft of rights. They say specifically, why do you allow these men in power to rob you step by step, openly and in secret, of the domain of your rights one after the other, until nothing at all will be left but a mechanized state system presided over by criminals and drunkards? This exactly describes the August 2025 actions following the No Kings protest. The Supreme Court removed judicial checks from the president firing civil service protections. They allowed, if nothing else, by taking away national injunctions, removing protections for your First Amendment. Step by step, domain by domain, The White Rose told us 83 years ago what would happen. In this letter, leaflet 3, the White Rose quotes Aristotle. It is part of the nature of tyranny to strive to see to it that nothing is kept hidden of that which any subject says or does, but that everywhere he will be spied upon. We're creating a culture of fear where people are being fired, they're being watched, their loyalty is being tested. They quote Aristotle again, to set all men against each other, friends against friends, and the people against the nobility. Speaker Mike Johnson called the No Kings protest a hate America rally. He called it the pro-Hamas wing of Antifa, turning patriotic Americans waving flags, reacting to the Pledge of Allegiance, into all of these lies. Treasury Secretary Besant, by the way, he blamed protesters for the government shutdown. So the strategy here is the same thing that the White Rose talked about all those years ago, dividing us, separating us. But the White Rose reminds us of the moral duty to resist. If you know, why do you not ask yourself, is your spirit already so crushed by abuse that you forget it is your right, or rather your moral duty, to abolish the system? The No Kings organizers made an identical argument. Greenberg said, "No Kings is about as an American value as you can imagine. It is as American as apple pie." The protest framed resistance not as rebellion, but as fulfilling America's profound rights. There would be no kings. No man is above the law. Don't hide your cowardice under a cloak of prudence. This is right from leaflet 3. For with each day you hesitate, failing to oppose this monster from hell, your guilt will keep growing as in a parabolic curve. The second No Kings protest on October 18th was estimated to have drawn 7 million people. That's the current estimate. So more people showed up on the streets. Why? Because the July through August crushing of our optimism had validated every single fear. They dismissed, those of us who said shit's coming in June, and then it came in July, in August, in September, in October. In the leaflet, they said the parabolic curve. Well, in America, the parabolic curve is rising. The White Rose Society, again, draws from Aristotle. It cites Aristotle saying, the subjects poor, in order to be able to pay the bodyguards and to keep them occupied with earning their livelihood so that they will have neither leisure nor opportunity to instigate conspiratorial acts. Okay? What do we draw from this? Trump's tariffs weakened the economy, right? The chaos kept people focusing on survival. The firing of 200,000 federal workers created economic uncertainty. And it did. The White Rose advocated passive resistance through non-cooperation. They said, do not give a penny to street collections. Do not contribute your collections of metal, textiles, and the like. Seek to convince all of your acquaintances of the senselessness of continuing, of the hopelessness of this war. The No Kings protest embodied a modern form of passive resistance, mass public demonstrations celebrating constitutional values, refusing to normalize authoritarianism. These protests are a deliberate, peaceful, and patriotic act, emphasizing American flags, the Pledge of Allegiance, the idea, just as the leaflet 3, to convince other people to join you in the street. But here's the devastating parallel. Both movements faced the same response. The White Rose students were executed in 1943 for distributing flyers. The No Kings protesters obviously were not executed, but within 6 weeks of June 14th, we lost an incredible amount of our democratic rights. Democratic institutions were systematically dismantled in front of our very face. The civil servants protecting us, they were gutted. In the opening of leaflet 3, the White Rose says to us, the state should exist as a parallel to the divine order and the highest of all utopias. Every individual human being has a claim to a useful and just state, one which secures the freedom of the individual as well as the good of the whole. And then they say, but our present state is the dictatorship of evil. The No Kings protesters celebrated with that same vision, a government, a country that secures individual freedom, where no man is above the law, where checks and balances prevent tyranny. The July through August actions of this administration reveal the gap between that vision and what is happening in the country. And Justice Jackson told us this. She said, complicity in the creation of a culture of disdain for lower courts, their rulings and the law will surely hasten the downfall of our government institutions, enabling our collective demise. The White Rose would have recognized this immediately. Institutions meant to secure your freedom, actively enabling its destruction. But perhaps even more chilling is that the White Rose warned us that hesitating would lead to nothing, nothing at all, nothing left but a mechanized state system presided over by criminals and drunkards. Here in 2025, we have an American government presided over by criminals and drunkards, quite literally. Quite literally. The whole point I'm trying to make here, the No Kings protests will be historically viewed as right, as correct. But being right actually didn't matter. In June, we identified the authoritarian's patterns. We said, this shit's happening. There's an authoritarian. In June, if you will remember, and really think here, in June, people were saying, it's not an authoritarian country. You guys are overreacting. You're crazy. Y'all, we are in an authoritarian country now. Stop pretending and talking as though we're not. Everyone that tried to warn us in June just got proven right July, August, September. That's what happened. Precisely as we said it would. The White Rose, they saw this as well. They said a victory of fascist Germany in this war would have immeasurable, frightful consequences. What's coming ahead in America, if it succeeds, will have frightful, immeasurable consequences. They knew then that if certain lines were crossed, once its institutions were successfully corrupted, that the state system, taking that back, was going to be very difficult. And the same is true here in America. If we allow our government to continue down this path, taking it back is going to be incredibly difficult. Both movements ask the same question. If you know this is happening, why are you doing nothing? And sometimes, in spite of our best efforts to show up on the streets, when we resist, the authoritarian will simply push back and take away more of our rights. But that is why we have to learn in the moment. That is why we're here today. The parallels are unprecedented. If I were to briefly summarize letter 3, and probably not do it enough justice, what I would say is the White Rose was trying to shake the people of Germany to say, you're losing your rights. They're being taken from you. How can you not see what is happening? And then they said, I understand many of you are saying, what can I do? How can I stop this fascism? I can't do anything. I'm helpless. I have a job. I have a family. I have a career. What can I do? And their answer is simple. If you do nothing, you're just going to have more rights taken from you. And eventually there will be nothing left. And you will pay the ultimate price, as of course they did. They paid the ultimate price. And they were trying to shake the people of Germany to say, what can you do? Do everything you can do. You work at a factory. Show up 10 minutes late. You work at the post office in Germany, 1942. Did you lose a letter accidentally? A letter to a general? Did you forget to send out that last bag of mail and it's not going to go out until tomorrow? Did you call in sick because you have the flu? Did you, as someone on the chat said, did you simply decide not to purchase from a company that was supporting fascism? Did you cancel your Disney Plus subscription? Did you stop spending where you might? The answer they in retrospect seems so simple. They are simply saying, do everything you can do. Not what can I do? And the parallel here is obvious, I think. Maybe not. Because our state, our government is inflicting enormous violence and suffering on us, as I just talked about. They're firing hundreds of thousands of government employees. They're rattling and shaking the economy. What choice do we have but to do everything we can? Someone says in the chat on the live show, the White Rose Society said, stay woke. Indeed. Stay woke. And listen, when we have conversations like this on the podcast or in the space, I think the obvious conclusion that people have is the understanding that the state is willing to inflict violence that we are simply not able to return. It's an obvious disadvantage in any kind of confrontation. But that does not mean that you cannot do nothing. And this is the lesson you have to draw. You can do something. You can resist somehow, and you must, just as the White Rose told us. You can only be as intimidated as you allow them to intimidate you. This is the lesson from the White Rose. This is the lesson from No Kings today, on this day of all days. They wanted us to be intimidated, to stay at home, to be afraid of the violence they threatened to commit against us. While, by the way, none of us still, this is not an equal playing field. No one went to the No Kings event to say, hey, we're going there to cause violence. Nonetheless, we were threatened with that violence. And just like the White Rose, just like my traffic stop, we responded with a simple assertion of our rights. And so my lesson tonight for you is quite simple. The White Rose asked the citizens of Germany in 1942, people say, what can I do? How can I resist this? And my answer tonight to you is quite simple. You resist this by using your rights, by not being willing to give up your rights. Your rights are not taken from you. You voluntarily give them up, whether that is consenting to an unlawful search, whether that is not going to a protest because you are afraid, whether that is seating and not showing up at your county meeting because you don't have time. Your rights are not taken from you. You give them up. And the outcome of you refusing to give up your rights, I can't predict that for you. But I can tell you that every single member of the White Rose knew and committed to doing what they chose to do, which was to resist. And they inspired thousands, if not millions of people. And today, thousands, if not millions of people were inspired by the action of the No Kings, a peaceful, nonviolent resistance with the aim of changing the course of American history. In spite of every attempt to prove us wrong, we succeeded. And the next and final part of this lesson is now we know, because they are not particularly smart individuals. They're not they're not great minds running the government right now. We know and should expect that what they're going to do next is try to take more of our rights away because we showed up and refused to give them up. And so, my friends, we must openly, brazenly refuse to play their game. That, my friends, is episode 10 of Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise. We have just 2 more lessons left of this season and 3 letters left, so you'll have to figure out how we squeeze all those things in. But I do hope you consider following the show, leaving a nice comment. That does help with Spotify. And I want to recognize that not only are we growing Ignite on this platform, but we're growing 1,000 leaders in 1,000 different communities. And I'll close with one simple example of that. On our Rebel Radio community, we have one member of our group who started a protest for today. She started by posting on Facebook that she would be out on Saturday, that she would be there for No Kings. This is a deep red part of Florida. And initially, just one person said that they would be there, which had to feel amazing, by the way. One person, I'll be there. I'll be by your side. Well, then eventually 16 people said, yeah, I'll be there too. And would you know it, today, just a few weeks later, after that one person said yes, the first follower, as we discussed in an earlier episode, that first follower said yes, and today on October 18th, 50 people in a deep red part of Florida showed up to resist fascism, which is an incredible thing. And the thing I would tell you is, for every one person that showed up, there's probably 100 people that wanted to show up, but they were afraid. And in the same way, every person that did show up is going to peel away another one of those people who will show up the next time. Every protest or event is not the end goal. The end goal is just to get to the next step, especially now. And so next time, maybe it's going to be 50 people plus 1 or 2, or maybe it's 50 people plus 100. At the end, it doesn't matter. Every person you can peel away from the fear is a person who will make your community stronger. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise.